Good morning, good morning, good morning. This is Dr. Herbert Harris, and this is Millionaire Mentorship Call number 278. Wow. I want to thank everybody for being on the call. Matt, I tell you, you're just like the Rock of Gibraltar, and you and Carolyn have always been here. If I've been here 278 days, you've been here 278 days. So thank you so much. I see Carolyn joined us online. Beautiful. All right. Our topic for today is 4 wealth building principles, the 4 principles of wealth building. And a lot of this comes from our chapter 8 in the 12 Universal Laws of Success, our book. Chapter 8 is the law of value. And for those of you who don't have the 12 Universal Laws of Success, you can get it on Amazon, or you can get it on our website, www.12, that's the number 12, uls.com. That's www.12uls.com. And you can get a copy of the 12 Universal Laws of Success autographed by me, plus a whole lot of other digital goodies. Welcome, Wanda. Thank you. Welcome to the call. This is a topic, wealth building is a topic that really gets my attention, especially this time of year when we're going into what they call the shopping season, and people are spending tons of money. And wealth building is a concept that every year I think we go about saying to ourselves, next year I'm going to do better about money. Next year I'm going to have more money at the end of the month. Next year I'm going to solve this riddle of survival. I like to begin with a quote, and it says this, that wealth is the slave of a wise master and the master of a fool. Wealth is the slave of a wise master and the master of a fool. I'll add to that wealth is a mindset. I don't want us to think of wealth as in the material sense. Wealth is a mindset, a way of thinking. So with that foundation, let's look at first, what are the 4 principles of wealth? And I'll give you a brief summary. The 4 principles of wealth are: number 1, the earning principle. The idea that you want to earn as much as possible. Number 2, the spending principle. How do you circulate your money? How do you use your money? Number 3, the saving principle. How do you set aside money for the future, for emergencies? And 4th, the investing principle. You see, wealth is created in the mind. And when we think about that, then if it's created in the mind, what do we have to do to translate the wealth that's in our mind into the wealth that's in our lives? One of the key thoughts is this, that how you allocate your money. See, money is often thought of as the getting potential of your self-image. Money is a resource that can work for you. Hey, Olden, how are you? Had a great time with you in Florida. So if money is a resource, then how do you make it work for you? There are many stories of how people accumulate wealth. You can accumulate wealth fast, or you can accumulate wealth slowly. There's a lady, I think, a Miss McCarty down in Texas, who was a janitor. She had no education, but yet over a period of about 40 years, she saved enough to give $150,000 for a scholarship fund for young ladies like herself who did not have any money to go to school. And so when we talk about creating wealth, it's not overnight success. You can create wealth overnight. You can create wealth in a systematic fashion. A key concept, though, is this. You have to solve the riddle of survival in order to create wealth. Now, what do I mean? To solve the riddle of survival means that you have determined, one, what you need to take care of you and your family, how much money, what resources, and then number two, determine what must be done to generate that income, and then number three, to do it. One of the key points in wealth creation is what I call critical income. It's like the critical mass of income. And that's that certain income level that you have to make to take care of the basic needs. And in the old days, we used to say the basic needs were food, clothing, and shelter. But now, in the modern age, you have to add transportation, communication, and health. So your ground zero, your critical income is, what do you have to make? What do you have to generate to take care of the basic needs of you and your family? And so for those on this call today, let it be a personal assignment that if you really want to get the benefits of what we're doing today, step one is totally under your control, to determine what is your ground zero, what is your critical wealth level, what is the amount of income that you must generate each day, each month, each week, each month to cover those basic needs: food, clothing, shelter, transportation, communication, and health care. The key to determining that ground zero is a budget. I was doing a talk on wealth building, and a person once said, well, why do you start talking about a budget? We want to know how to create wealth, how to get rich. And I'll say this: if you do not have a budget, and a budget is a graphic picture of the way you allocate your money, the way it comes in and the way it goes out. In the basic sense, your budget is the allocation of all of your money, all of your resources. And so if you do not know how much money you require each month, each week, each day, then you have no idea how much you have to make to meet that requirement. And therefore, you will never get rich. Now, I don't want to be pessimistic. I mean, you can hit the lottery, but when we look at it over the long term, if you don't have a budget, then you will never know what's coming in, and you'll never know what has to go out. So the budget is that allocation of how you spend and circulate your income. Every great businessman, I remember reading the life of John Paul Getty, J.P. Morgan, and from a little boy, Morgan's father taught him to keep meticulous records. And he kept his ledger and a little ledger booklet with him at all times, and he knew exactly how much money he had from time to time. He also knew his net worth. And so step one is to, one, set a budget, write your budget, where it's going, and then be meticulous about how the money flows, how it comes in and how it comes out. So the first commandment of wealth building is establish a budget. Once you establish your budget, you'll learn something very interesting. You learn what's important to you. In other words, once you look at the food, clothing, shelter, transportation, communication, and health care, and you begin to establish that ground zero, then you have to look at, you can now say, what is really necessary to be happy? What do I need to maintain, to solve the riddle of survival and go forward in peace and growth? Let's see, welcome Debbie. Debbie, thank you, Carolyn. What is necessary to be happy? You know, it is in this point that you begin to see what your value system is. If you never do your budget, if you just spend the money that comes into your space, then you never know where it's going. So when you put your budget together now, you want to determine how to allocate your income based on your budget. And what you'll find is that if you get too much into materiality, you start thinking, you know, the cars and the watches and the bling, that's okay. But if you're spending your money on things like that, then you're probably putting your finances and your future wealth potential on shaky grounds. We often say, seek first the kingdom. Seek first the consciousness. Once you have a wealth consciousness, as we said in the very beginning, wealth is a mindset. So when you seek first the mindset of wealth, then that can help you be more discriminating about the things that you allocate your money to. And so as you look at your ground zero, what type of food are you going to eat? Are you going to eat out all the time? You know, when we were looking at our budget one point, we eat out a lot. I am a terrible cook. I wouldn't eat my own cooking. Sandra doesn't care to cook a lot. So we eat out a lot. And when we looked at our budget, we were amazed at how much we spend eating out. Even though the cost of food will get your attention, the cost of eating out every day is a whole lot more expensive. And so now you make a decision. Are you going to continue to eat out, or are you going to make other arrangements? You're going to say, well, you know what, let's just eat out part of the time, and let's figure out a way to cut down on that. Let's eat more at home. Let's get some prepared foods. So once you start looking at that ground zero and you start looking at your value system, even down to clothing, you know, as a speaker and as a trainer, I have a friend that has 50 suits, tailor-made. And I'm just amazed. And he loves to take you in and show he has so to maintain those 50 suits, he's had to build a special closet. And if you really added it up, probably each one of those suits is at least $1,000. So by the time you add up the closet and the special thing, he's probably spent $100,000 in wardrobe. Now, that brings him joy, and that's fine. But he may want to look at that at some point and say, you know what? Well, my conclusion was this. Since I speak around the world, and I'm pretty much meeting new audiences most of the time, I can get by with 10 suits. I can really get by with 5 suits. Rather than change suit, change audiences. So these are the kind of things that you begin to look at as you evaluate your ground zero and how your value system will impact your ability to create wealth. When we look at the lives of some of the great ones, you'll find that I won't say that they lived modestly, but I'll say that they did not let their wealth define them. Warren Buffett, the founder of Berkshire Hathaway, a multi-billionaire, still lives in the same house for the last 35, 40 years. Steve Jobs, the founder of Apple, still lived in the same house. In other words, they had something that was comfortable, it pleased them, and they were happy with it. So when you begin to start this wealth journey, that may take a little soul searching to determine your why. Why do you need certain material things? Why do you have to have a Rolex watch? Why do you have to have a shiny car every other year? See, once you start looking at that now, once you've settled in on that budget of what is really, really important to you, then you can approach the earning principle, because now that you know what is important, now you can look at the earning principle. And the earning principle says that you have to exchange time, energy, for value. So you're paid a certain amount based on the energy and the time that you put into it. When you have a job, they pay you based on the value that you bring to the job. You're working on somebody else's dream, but you're an important part of their dream, and they pay you accordingly. Once you can look at that earning principle, you say, okay, I need to earn as much as possible. We're talking now about exchanging value. What do I have to do now to earn as much as possible? Now that's a key point. Because when you look at that earning principle, you can get stuck there. You know, many times we can get what they call a dead-end job, where the earning is just enough to keep you broke, where the earning is just enough to cover the riddle of survival, to cover your expenses and nothing more. Keeping up with the Joneses can undermine your earning ability. When you start trading time for dollars, the idea is this, that you want to make the best deal possible. There's a beautiful poem, and I can't think, but the bottom line on the poem says that you can exchange for life based on what you ask. And at the bottom line, it says some people exchange their dreams for a penny. But the realization of life is that whatever you ask of life, life will give you what you ask with conviction. And so when we talk about this creating wealth, number one, let's trade the time for the dollars in the most efficient way. That once you do that, realize that your time is very valuable, that it's irreplaceable. And so therefore, whatever you do it so that you can create the maximum income for the amount of effort put forth. Once we have that earning principle together, and sometimes that may mean getting another job. Very often it means that you may have to go into a business. There are ways that you can increase your income. Example, there are 3 ways you can make money. Number one, on a job, but you're going to be paid then based on somebody else's evaluation of what you're worth, because you're working on somebody else's dream. If you have an inheritance, then the income from that inheritance can come and take care of you, can manipulate those investments to give a higher return. But for many of us, to increase our income requires that we be in business for ourselves, because when you're in business for yourself, you determine the value that you exchange for the time that you give. You are the boss. You are the captain of your ship. Matt says, amen. I tell you, I'd rather be working on my own dream and getting underpaid than working on somebody else's dream and being underpaid. So once we got that earning principle, then now we want to look at how do we leverage the earning potential. And that's why a business is so important, because when you look at the number of hours in the day, I saw a beautiful quote and it says, you have the same number of hours that Beyonce has. You have the same number of hours in your day that Bill Gates has. So what are they doing that you're not doing? They may be leveraging those hours. And that's another reason why a business is so important. I'm not, harping heavily on business, but I'm giving you a reality, folks, that if you want to go for your dreams and create wealth, the most efficient way is to own a business. Now, you can be as Miss McCarty, who created that wealth over 40 to 50 years. And if that's your goal, if that's what makes you happy, that's fine. Create that wealth over 40 to 50 years. But I'll say this, that in the current business model, the current environment, you may not be able to stay on a job 40 or 50 years, because the model now is once you've given your value to the company, once the company is paying you based on seniority and experience, then you're heading down the road out the door. And so when you're working on somebody else's dream, you really cannot assure that you'll be around long enough to accumulate that money to create wealth 40 or 50 years down the road. So once you maximize your income, then think now, let's look at how I am spending that income. How I am circulating that income. Now I just said something very powerful. Circulating as opposed to spending. When you spend money, there's that sense that it's gone. They say money flies. Mary says, just over broke. It's not the dream we want. I agree. Janet says, hello from Clover, South Carolina. When you're working on somebody else's dream, they're going to pretty much keep you just over broke, because believe me, they're only going to pay you just enough to keep you from quitting. And the interesting thing is you're going to only do just enough to keep from getting fired. So once you determine how to maximize your income, the spending principle. So many of us just spend money when there's no prospect of return. Money must be looked at as a seed. In other words, money is a seed, a great seed, and every time you spend your money, it should be looked at as you're planting a seed. And you're planting a seed with an expectation of return. If money were corn, and you had the greatest seed corn in the world, and you handle that corn like you handle your money, spreading it out in the wind on trivial things, you'll starve. You'll never eat of that corn. And so spending has to have that sense that whatever I'm doing with my money is investment. Why do I need to buy another coat? I have 3 coats to keep me warm. The whole point of it is that I want to keep warm. Why do I need to buy another car? This one works fine. So when you get into the spending aspect of wealth building, you'll find that your ego can come in. That very often we let money define us rather than being the master of money. And so we have people who may have a poor self-image and low self-esteem, and they'll spend money to make people like them. They'll spend money to make people love them. This spending principle is huge because you can become a slave to brand names. We have friends that they can't sleep on a sheet that's under a 500 count. Let me tell you something. When you're tired, you could sleep on a croaker sack. But their ego tells them that they have to have these type of material things to say that they're good people. So for those on the line, check that out from the neck up and from the heart down. If you're spending your money to validate who you are, to let the world know that you're a good person, to let the world know that you're successful, chances are that will undermine your ability to create wealth on a long-term basis. So look at money as a seed. That seed you send out and it does not return to you void. It always brings back something of value. Every dime, every dollar that you spend is an investment that you expect a return from. When we look at long-term capital appreciation, those of us who invested in mutual funds years ago, there was a mantra that if you invested $100 a month for 40 years, you'd have $1 million. I can tell you that's absolutely true. If you invested in a good mutual fund that had a good return. And so look at your money, the way you spend it, as an investment. So the spending principle says every dime you spend, every dollar you spend is a seed out of which your life grows. The third principle is the saving principle. Now this principle is critical because very often we'll say, when I speak to young people, they say, well, you know, Dr. Harris, I hear what you're saying, but I don't make enough to save. I don't have enough to save. That's when you have to save. He said, I'm only making $100 a week. Well, you better set aside $10 because otherwise that seed will not be that can grow the reality that will take you to the point where you're making $200 a week, $400 a week, $1,000 a week. And so with the saving principle, the key point is to pay yourself first. That whatever income you have, once you know your expenses and how to cover them, then that surplus, the saving is that surplus you have over your expenditures, and you must have surplus. If you don't have surplus, you need to rearrange your values. Either earn more or spend less, but you have to have a surplus. Otherwise, you go into the hole every day, every week, every month. So the saving principle says, set aside enough money to handle emergencies, to handle contingencies. One of the big mistakes I think we make with our children is we make them think that no matter what happens, we're going to be there for them. You know, that if they don't pay their rent, we'll back them up and pay a month's rent to keep them from being put out. If they don't allocate their funds to keep their phone on, they'll come and they know that we'll back them up. And so they never learn the life lesson of mastering money so that money works for you. So this idea of the saving principle is critical because this is the principle out of which you build your future. This Miss McCarty, the lady who accumulated $150,000 to give away as in a scholarship fund, she used the saving principle. She set aside, although she was a washerwoman, a domestic, she never made over $800 a month, but she set aside a certain amount of out of that money to be a seed for the future. So the savings principle helps you create seeds for the future. If you are not saving money, you're going to be trapped on the wealth treadmill. Let's call it on the poverty treadmill. How much do you need to save? You know your lifestyle, you know your reality. But I'll say this, that have enough saved to handle all contingencies for at least a month and preferably a year. Many of us who go into business for ourselves, after we have 1 or 2 good months, we're ready to quit our jobs and do the business full time. And almost to the person, you'll find that when you make that decision, it's generally premature. You may have 1 or 2 good months and then it takes a nosedive. And so what you want to do in the saving is to save enough money to handle all or most potential emergency situations that you can foresee. And how can you foresee it? Because you have a budget. If you don't have a budget, you can't do that. So you can now set aside enough to say, okay, I can be sustained a year. No matter what happens, I can maintain my lifestyle for a year or 2 years. So with the savings principle, you create that security for yourself where you don't have to keep wondering and worrying about how to make ends meet, where you don't have to worry about more month at the end of the money. And then finally, that fourth principle. Once you have mastered the saving principle, once you've set aside enough to handle your contingencies and your emergencies, in politics, every city, every municipality has that emergency fund set aside to handle snow removal, handle all kinds of emergencies. So once you have that set aside, then the next point is to start to invest. And sometimes another approach might be that out of your savings, to pull 10% out of that, to stash it in your investment bucket. That way you don't have to wait to start investing. And I would really recommend that because saving and creating wealth is a habit. And so just as you get the habit of paying yourself first, take that 10% off the pot and put it into your savings bucket. Then develop another habit of whatever you're putting into that savings bucket, take 10% off that and put it in your investment bucket. So if you're making $1,000 a week, then put $100 a week in your savings bucket. If you're putting $100 a week in your savings bucket, take $10 out of that and put it into your investment bucket. And so as you move along now, you're creating this whole dynamic, this habit of wealth building. You see, investment is very much like focused planning of your seed, that seed for the future. You invest with the expectation of return. And the better investments you make, the better the expectation of return. You want to get to a point where the income from your investments are sufficient to take care of you in the lifestyle that you're accustomed with no further input. That's when you truly solve the riddle of survival, when now you're free of the rat race where the investments that you've made now generate sufficient income that you can live at the lifestyle that you're comfortable without depleting that asset. One of the most powerful investments that you can make is investments in yourself, investments in your education. You see, we do better when we know better. We know better when we get better. We get better by learning more, by more exposure. And so any investment that in knowledge, in education, in learning more, in getting more exposure, and going to see different things. You see, where we are, we always see based on where we are and where we've been. So the greater exposure that you can experience, the greater your power of attracting more and more wealth into your life and into your experience. And so when we look at this now, we talked about these 4 principles of wealth building. The key is, number 1, the earning principle. To earn as much as possible for the time invested, to recognize that each moment you spend working is an irreplaceable asset, that the Creator gives you each moment as a talent, and you can use it or you can bury it. If you bury it, you lose it. As a matter of fact, that moment given goes regardless. The value of it comes from what you do. So do the best you can, earn as much as you can, being very deliberate about that. Number 2, the spending principle. Adjust your value system so that every dime you spend, every dollar you spend is looked at as an investment for the future. That you don't spend money, you circulate money with an expectation of return, knowing that everything you buy can grow into something bigger in the future. The saving principle, to always save. The saving principle is absolute, that no matter what you earn, whether it's a lot or a little, to set aside at least 10% to take care of contingencies. And then finally, the investment principle. Save, invest a portion of what you save so that your investments can generate more. The idea of investment is that there comes a time where money becomes such a servant for you that the money alone through your investments is sufficient to take care of you at the level that is comfortable for you. So this is Dr. Herbert Harris saying, hey, this is the Millionaire Mentorship Call number 278. We covered the 4 principles of wealth building, and when we can use these principles, one of my great friends, Russell Hemphill, had a very interesting cut on this. He says, number 1, earn as much as possible. Number 2, save a portion of what you earn. Number 2, spend wisely. Number 3, save a portion of what you earn to invest to generate more. When we can do these things, let me tell you something, folks, for sure and for real, the best is yet to come. And so it is.